I handed the gate agent my boarding pass without looking back. Behind me, somewhere in the swarming chaos of Terminal 3, my wife of 4 years was pressed against a man named Devon, a man whose name had lit up on her phone screen 43 times in the past 2 weeks alone, a man she had described to me once, laughing over wine, as a mistake she was embarrassed she ever made. She had excused herself at the check-in counter, her hand light on my arm, her voice easy. "Restroom," she said. "Be right back." And I had watched her, instead of looking away, because something in my gut had been pulling at me for weeks the way a stitch pulls before it gives. And I watched her walk not toward the restrooms, but toward the main terminal entrance, where a man in a gray jacket stood with his arms already open and his face turned toward her. And I stood at the check-in counter for 11 seconds. I counted them deliberately, the way you count when you are trying to remain in your body and not in your reaction. Our luggage was already tagged, already committed to the plane. The airline agent had moved on to the next passenger. The belt had swallowed our bags with complete indifference to the fact that the marriage that owned them was dissolving in real time, 15 feet from where they had disappeared. 11 seconds of watching my wife walk into another man's arms, and then I picked up my carry-on, adjusted the strap over my shoulder, and walked to the gate. 4 years and 2 months earlier, I had proposed to Celeste on a rooftop in Lisbon. We had been backpacking for 2 weeks, her idea, or enthusiastically adopted, and she had sunburned shoulders and a glass of port wine she kept setting down and forgetting because she was too busy talking. She had seen a painting at a gallery that afternoon, something by a Portuguese artist I hadn't heard of, and she was still animated about it hours later, her hands moving in the amber evening air as she tried to describe the quality of light the painter had captured, the particular way old afternoon falls through wooden shutters. I had the ring in my jacket pocket for 3 days by then. I had planned to wait for dinner, for something deliberate and orchestrated, but watching her face under that Lisbon sky, I couldn't manufacture a better moment than the one already happening without my help. I said her name. She turned. I was already on one knee on the stone. She cried the ugly kind of tears, the kind that don't consult themselves about mascara or composure, that run straight down to the jaw. She said yes before I had finished asking the question. She pulled me up by the lapels and kissed me in a way that made 2 strangers at the next table start clapping without knowing why, because happiness at that register is visible from a distance. I had believed in that moment completely. There is no footnote I can add to it. It was real. The man on that rooftop was not mistaken about what he felt. He was only mistaken about what she felt, and that mistake would take 4 more years to fully reveal itself. A month after the engagement, I had received a call from a headhunter about a senior architect position at a firm in Amsterdam. This was not an ordinary opportunity, and this was the kind of call that arrives once in a career and doesn't make a return trip. Lead architect on an international portfolio, a firm that had won 2 major design awards in consecutive years, a compensation package that would have reset my entire financial trajectory. I flew to Amsterdam for a second interview on a gray November morning and came home 3 days later with the job offer in my email and the complete certainty that I was going to take it. Celeste cried again when I told her. Not the Lisbon kind. She had roots in Portland. Deep, specific, personal roots. Her family was there. Her sister, the person she was closest to in the world, was there. Her friendships, her career, her entire social architecture was built in that city, and she wasn't ready to dismantle it. And I loved her, and did not want to win an argument that cost her something she couldn't rebuild. We were about to be married. I wanted to start the marriage on terms she could live with. So I called the Amsterdam director, and thanked him, and turned the offer down. I told myself the work would come again, that she was the rarer thing. I believed both of those statements completely when I said them, and I want to be accurate about that, because the tragedy of what came next is not that I was a fool, but that I was sincere. There is a difference. The gate agent scanned my boarding pass and smiled and said, "Have a great flight." I walked down the jetway. Inside the plane, I found my window seat, stowed my bag in the overhead, and sat down. The seat beside me, Celeste's seat, booked under her name, with her meal preference selected, each with the aisle access she always preferred on flights over 2 hours, was empty. I looked at it for a moment. Then I looked out the window at the tarmac in the afternoon sun. There was nothing out there but ordinary concrete and ordinary light, and the ordinary fact of a decision that had already been made and could not be unmade, which was not my decision but hers, 14 months ago, and then again this morning. I took out my phone and called my brother. He picked up on the second ring, already slightly surprised by the timing. "Rowan, aren't you supposed to be—" "I'm on the plane," I said. "I'm in my seat. I'm alone." A pause. The pause of a man reading context without needing to be told what it means. "Celeste went to say goodbye to Devon," I said. The name felt strange, spoken aloud, too solid, too specific. I'd like pressing on a bruise. At the airport, while our bags were being checked, she walked across the terminal to find him, and I watched her do it, and then I got on the plane. "Rowan." His voice shifted into something low and careful. "What do you need right now?" "Your friend Elise," I said. "From law school. Family law, right?" "I'm texting her as we speak," he said, without asking me whether I had thought this through, without performing the shock he probably felt, without suggesting I take a breath and give it a day. He just acted. That is what the best people do in the worst moments. They act. "She'll call you when you land." "Thank you," I said. "Rowan." "I'm fine," I said. "Genuinely. I'll call you when I'm through customs." I hung up. The flight attendant came over the intercom and asked everyone to switch to airplane mode. I looked at my phone one last time, at Celeste's name in my contacts, at the small thumbnail photo of her laughing at some dinner 2 summers ago, uncomplicated and bright-faced, and not yet, as far as I had understood at the time, 12 months into keeping a secret from me. I put the phone in my pocket and looked out the window. The plane began to move. Let me tell you what the 6 weeks before the airport had actually been, because that morning at the check-in counter didn't arrive from nowhere. It was the conclusion of a long and slow accumulation of things I had been choosing, with increasing effort not to name. It had begun on a March morning with her phone on the kitchen counter, unlocked, the screen lit and the message thread open while she was in the shower. As I had gone to move the phone out of the way of a coffee mug, and the screen was just there, visible, not requiring me to look for anything. Devon. A conversation long enough that I could see it was not recent in its origins. I didn't read all of it. My eyes found fragments, the specific kind of shorthand that develops between people who have been inside each other's lives in a particular way. And I set the phone down exactly where I had found it, and stood in my own kitchen with the coffee mug still in my hand, and felt the floor tilt under me. I told myself I would ask her about it that evening. At dinner, I decided, directly and calmly. And then I looked at her across the dinner table, and she was laughing at something on the television, completely at ease, but present in the uncomplicated way that a person who isn't holding anything is present, and I could not fit the image in front of me against the thing I had seen on her phone. And so I chose, cowardly and quietly, to tell myself I had misread it. That Devon was an old friend, and old friends sent long messages, and I was a person with a suspicious nature reading normal things as sinister. I went to bed next to her and stared at the ceiling and said nothing. 6 weeks of nothing. 6 weeks of watching. Twice I woke at 2 or 3 in the morning to find her side of the bed empty. Both times, by the time I was fully conscious, she had come back. "Couldn't sleep," she said once. "Didn't want to wake me." I lay in the dark, listening to my own breathing, and said nothing. I found a card in the recycling, handwritten. They're buried under newspaper, so it was not visible unless you were moving things around, which I was because it was recycling day. I recognized enough of the handwriting from the phone screen to know whose it was. I read the card. I put it back exactly where I had found it, and went to work and designed a residential terrace for a client in Seattle, and came home and made dinner, and we ate together, and she asked how my day was, and I said fine, and asked how hers was, and she said fine, and we watched television and went to bed. 6 weeks of standing in a burning building, telling myself the smoke was probably nothing serious. The flight to Cancun was 4 hours and 12 minutes. I slept for most of it, a flat, dreamless, uninterrupted sleep that I had not achieved in months. The stone that had been sitting in my chest, the coiled thing assembled from suspicion and deliberate ignorance and the exhausting daily work of not quite knowing, was gone. What was left in its place was something quieter and considerably more solid, the cold bedrock clarity of a person who has stopped waiting and started deciding. I landed at 5:47 in the evening. My phone, coming back from airplane mode, assembled 17 missed calls from Celeste, 11 texts, and 2 voicemails in a single cascade of notifications. I stood in the arrivals hall of Cancun International and read every text in order, start to finish, the way you read evidence. The arc was clear and predictable. First, confusion. "Rowan, where are you?" Then, alarm. "Rowan, please answer me." Then, the shift, the hinge, the moment she understood that I had understood. "I know how it looks. It isn't what you think. Please let me explain." And finally, 8 minutes before landing, the most honest message in the sequence. "I know what you saw. I know you saw me. Please don't do anything yet. I love you. Please." I put my phone away and collected both bags, mine and Celeste's, from the carousel. I wheeled them through customs, out through the automatic doors into the evening heat of the coast, and I called Elise. She answered on the first ring. My brother had briefed her thoroughly, and she was ready. She was exactly what that moment required. Methodical, calm, specific, and entirely without sentimentality about the work in front of her. She did not ask me if I was sure. She did not suggest I sleep on it. She asked me to walk her through the timeline, and I did, starting with the morning in March, and moving forward. And she listened without interruption, and then told me, "Write it all down tonight, every detail you can recall, dates and specifics wherever possible. Do not delete any messages or communications of any kind. Do not discuss the property or finances with Celeste until we have spoken again." She would have preliminary paperwork drafted by Monday morning. Then I called my wife. She answered before the first ring had ended, which told me she had been holding the phone in both hands, waiting. "Rowan!" Her voice was already destroyed. "Rowan, please, I'm at the ticket counter. There's a flight at 9. I can get there by midnight and we can—" "Don't come, Celeste." The silence that followed had a pressure to it, the kind of silence that isn't empty but full. "What?" "I know about Devon," I said. "Not only about today. I saw your phone 6 weeks ago. I saw the thread. I've been waiting since then, giving you the benefit of a doubt I should have withdrawn on the first morning." I kept my voice completely level. I was in an airport in Mexico. People were walking past me with suitcases and children and all the ordinary business of travel. I misread nothing. She broke. The words came in a rush, rehearsed and then unrehearsed, the way speech falls apart when you've prepared for one version of a conversation and gotten a different one. It wasn't what I thought. It was emotional, not physical. She needed me to believe that. She had needed connection in a particular way, and she hadn't known how to ask me for it. And Devon had understood something about her that was specific to their history, and she knew that was not an excuse. She knew there was no excuse, but it was over. Today was the end of it. She had chosen me. She had always chosen me. She just needed to close the door properly and in person because she owed him that much, and she owed me a clean break from it, and she was sorry. She was so sorry, and she loved me. She had never stopped loving me. I waited. I let her run out of words. "How long?" I said. "Rowan, how long, Celeste?" A silence that lasted long enough to answer its own question. Then, 14 months. I did the arithmetic without wanting to. The way you do math you already know the answer to. 14 months. Meaning she had started this 8 months into our 3rd year of marriage, while I was flying to Portland every other weekend, while I was paying half the mortgage on a house in her city, while I had been, every day, the man who had turned down Amsterdam and had no regrets about it because he believed it was the right trade. 14 months, I said. It's over. Today was... I was ending it. I ended it. For us. You ended it, I said, at an airport, while our anniversary luggage was being tagged, because you needed to say goodbye in person. You left me at the check-in counter and walked across the terminal to put your arms around him. I paused. Last week you were telling me about the cenotes, Celeste. You were showing me the swimsuits. You booked the excursions. You were doing all of that while texting him. Nothing. How many times did you see him? I said. In 14 months. I'm not asking for evidence. I'm asking because I want to know what the last 14 months actually were. A very long silence. Please, good night, Celeste, I said. Do not come to Cancun. When I am home, we will speak through attorneys. If you come to the resort, I will have the room locked to your name. I paused. I am sorry for what we were before this. I am not sorry for this decision. She said my name, the way she had said it in Lisbon. I made myself remember the 6 weeks, the phone screen, the card in the recycling, the empty side of the bed at 2 a.m, and I said, goodbye. And I hung up. The resort was beautiful. She had excellent taste in resorts. White-walled rooms open to the coast, ceiling fans moving the salt air in slow circles, the Caribbean visible from the balcony in both directions. I ordered room service, ate outside watching the dark come off the water, drank 1 glass of wine, and went to bed at 10. I slept 9 continuous hours. It was the longest I had slept without waking in over a year, and when I woke to the sound of the ocean and the ceiling fan and the ordinary luxury of a morning with no more secrets in it, I lay there for a while and simply breathed. My brother had not been idle. While I was sleeping, he had been managing the landscape. Celeste had worked the phones the previous evening. He told me over breakfast, my phone propped against the coffee pot, calling our mutual friends, people she calculated were sympathetic to her, asking them to reach out to me, to urge me to listen, to create a buffer of people advocating for patience and conversation. My brother had gotten ahead of every one of those calls. He did not dramatize, he did not editorialize, and he stated the facts plainly. She spent 14 months in an emotional affair with her former boyfriend. She arranged a farewell meeting at the airport on the morning of their anniversary trip, while the luggage was already checked. Rowan boarded the plane alone. The truth, stated plainly and without embellishment, moved through the social network and settled. Most of our friends went quiet. A few reached out to me directly, not to advocate, but simply to say they were sorry, and they were there. That was enough. What happened at her firm, I genuinely did not engineer. Devon was a client of the firm where Celeste worked, and she had been coordinating some of their contact through her work calendar and work email, her firm's email, backed up to firm servers, They're searchable by the compliance team that every mid-sized professional services company maintains precisely because these things happen. A partner at the firm was a friend of my brother's. The connection was tenuous. The discovery was inevitable. The internal review that followed was the firm's process operating correctly, and I had no part in it beyond being the person whose marriage had surfaced the information. The consequence Celeste experienced was not my revenge. It was the natural weight of a structure built on a foundation that couldn't hold. By Wednesday, her calls to me had stopped entirely, which meant she had hired her own attorney, which was the sensible and correct thing to do. On Thursday, I took the cenote excursion she had booked for both of us. A van of tourists. A guide who knew the limestone formations intimately and described them with the infectious enthusiasm of a person who couldn't believe this was his actual work. We climbed down into the cave, and the water was precisely as she had described it to me over dinner 3 weeks before. Cold and still and glassy. Columns of light dropping through the ceiling opening like something deliberate. A silence complete enough to rest inside. I swam alone and floated on my back and stared at the stone ceiling and thought about Amsterdam, about the morning I had called to turn the offer down, about the particular quality of certainty I had felt in that decision. I climbed out of the water, dried off, sat on a rock, and composed an email to the Amsterdam director. Careful and brief. Telling him I was reconsidering my situation, but telling him I would be in Europe in the fall, asking, without expectation, if he might have time for coffee. He responded in 40 minutes. The original position was long filled, but the firm had grown significantly, and there was a senior role opening in the spring, lead architect on a portfolio of international residential projects. And he had, he said, thought of me when the position had been designed. He would very much like to meet. I read the message twice. Then I put the phone in my pocket and went back to the group. The last 2 days I spent almost entirely offline. Long mornings on the beach, an afternoon wandering the town, going into shops without wanting to buy anything, eating fish at a table on the sidewalk with a lemon soda and no particular agenda. I met an older couple at the resort bar on my last evening. Married 31 years, still clearly delighted by each other in the specific, unperformative way that only comes from a marriage that has actually worked. We talked for 2 hours. They didn't know anything about my circumstances. I was just a person with opinions about architecture and an interest in other people's marriages. It felt, in a way I hadn't anticipated, completely wonderful. I flew home Sunday. My brother picked me up and handed me a coffee and drove without asking how I was, because he knew, and knew that I knew, and the drive itself was a form of answer. The divorce was clean in the way that straightforward facts make things clean. Celeste did not contest the core of it. There was negotiation over the house. I had carried more of the mortgage. And once that was documented clearly, her attorney did not dispute the split. Elise was thorough and precise, and always 3 steps ahead of the conversation. The process took 5 months, and was not pleasant, and was, at every stage, fair. Devon, I heard eventually from a friend, did not remain the closed door Celeste had arranged him to be at an airport on a September morning. The farewell she had organized with such deliberate logistical care had not, in the weeks following, stayed a farewell. Whatever that information means about her choices is not mine to interpret. What it meant for me was simply that the picture I had drawn of the situation had been accurate, and I filed that under confirmed and moved forward. The Amsterdam position materialized the following February. Or better terms than the original offer. Senior partner track, 4 countries, a team of 12, a Rotterdam public housing project that had already been profiled in 2 international journals. The director called on a Tuesday morning while I was standing in my empty Portland kitchen with moving boxes stacked in the front room and the walls stripped bare. I said yes before he had finished outlining the terms. He laughed and said good, because he'd already told 2 partners he was bringing me on. My brother helped me load the storage unit. We stood on the empty driveway afterward in the evening cold without saying much. He put his hand on my shoulder. That was the whole speech. It was the right one. Amsterdam in March was gray and cold and exactly what I had turned down years ago. Canal light, brick reflections, a particular northern quality of sky that asks something of you and rewards the asking. I found my flat in the Jordan, high ceilings, old floors, a drafting table at the canal window. I started work Monday, and by Friday knew that this was the life that had been waiting for me on the other side of a gate in Terminal 3. The work was extraordinary. The colleagues were sharp and genuinely funny. I ran along the Prinsengracht in the mornings and found a jazz club and a bookshop with an eccentric but reliable organizational system. I learned Dutch imperfectly and committedly. I made friends who would last. 18 months after Cancun, I went to Lisbon for a conference and spent a free afternoon on that rooftop. Now a restaurant, same amber sky, different furniture. I ordered port and sat with it without performing anything. Not grief, yet not triumph, not the clean narrative of a man who has processed his past cleanly. Just a person on a rooftop where he had once knelt on stone and meant it, having a drink in the place where that meaning lived, acknowledging it and letting it be what it was. Real and finished, and not required to have been different for him to be exactly where he was now. I flew back to Amsterdam that night. The following spring, I won a design citation for a waterfront residential complex in Rotterdam. My name on the certificate, my logic described in print. My director sent burgundy to my desk with a handwritten note. My brother sent 2 words and a period. I started something slow and unhurried with a woman named Petra from urban planning. The kind of beginning that doesn't announce itself, or that grows out of proximity and honesty and the accumulated evidence of someone who asks exactly what they mean and means exactly what they say. I told her about the marriage plainly and briefly, at the natural point in the order of things. She received it without theater, asked one direct question, and then asked about Rotterdam. And I thought, yes. This is what the weight correctly distributed feels like. This is what the ground actually being solid feels like. The Utrecht Library project consumed me in the best way a project can, which is by demanding more of you than you thought you had to give, and then proving you wrong. 5 stories of glass and reclaimed brick along a canal edge. We a public building designed to feel neither institutional nor temporary. The kind of structure that says we believed in this place enough to build something that would outlast us. The brief had come with a long list of constraints and a short budget, and the creative restrictions those combinations impose are, in my professional experience, where the genuinely good work happens. You cannot hide behind excess when there isn't any. Every material decision is visible. Every spatial choice is load-bearing in the conceptual sense, and the result either works or it very publicly doesn't. It worked. The review committee approved the final design in the first round, which my director said had happened twice in the firm's history. The construction began in autumn, and I visited the site every 3 weeks, standing in the skeleton of the thing I had drawn, watching it become itself. That is the part of architecture that no rendering captures. The moment a building stops being an idea and starts being a place. When the structure goes up, and the light starts moving through it in the way you calculated it would. When the proportions that existed in your mind as abstractions become the actual distances between walls. When a person stands in the unfinished shell of the building, and you can see in their face that they understand what it is going to be. Petra came to the site with me once, in November, when the frame was up and the canal-side glass panels were being fitted. She stood in what would become the main reading room, the afternoon light coming through the south glass in exactly the columns I had planned, And she was quiet for a long time. Then she turned to me and said, "I see what you meant now." And I understood that she was talking about more than the building. My brother visited in December as planned. I took him on the canal boat in the cold, bought him terrible tourist beer from a stand near the Rijksmuseum, walked him through the Jordaan at dusk when the lights came on in the old buildings, and the canal went gold. He looked around at all of it, the flat, the work, the life that had accumulated quietly over 2 years, and he said nothing for a long time. Then he said, "You look like yourself." And I said, "Yeah. I think I finally am." We had dinner at a restaurant near my flat, the kind of Amsterdam place that is small and warm and doesn't seem to care whether you're impressive, just whether you're hungry. And we ate too much and stayed too long and talked about everything and nothing, the way you can with a person who has known you your entire life and has no agenda except the conversation. He asked me once whether I ever thought about how things might have gone differently, whether I regretted any of it. I thought about it honestly, the way he deserved, the Lisbon rooftop, the Amsterdam offer I had turned down, the 6 weeks of deliberate not knowing, the 11 seconds at the gate. "No," I said. "I don't. Not because I wasn't hurt," I told him, not because it hadn't cost me something real, but because the path I had walked, including the part that went straight through the fire, had led me somewhere I was genuinely glad to be. And I could not honestly wish myself unburned if being burned was the route here. He nodded. He refilled his glass. We moved on. 5 years after the airport, I sat at my drafting table on a Tuesday morning in October with the low gold Amsterdam autumn light doing its precise and particular work through the canal window, and I did something I rarely do, which is look all the way backward. 11 seconds at a check-in counter, a carry-on adjusted over one shoulder, a gate agent scanning a boarding pass, a seat beside me, empty. I had made that decision in a moment of complete and unambiguous clarity, and it had not required courage in the Hollywood sense. No dramatic music, no final speech delivered to a crumbling adversary. It had required only that I keep walking when the evidence told me to keep walking, that I trust my own read of a room when the room was unmistakable. The grief had been real, and I had let it have its season. And the loss of what Celeste and I had been, in the version of us that had existed before it stopped being that, had a legitimate weight, and I had not pretended otherwise. I had felt it in a Cancun hotel room, and in a Portland kitchen, and on a Lisbon rooftop with a glass of wine. And then I had let it finish, the way seasons finish, without apology, and without being asked to carry it past its time. What was on the other side of it was not compensation. It was not a consolation arranged to make the story work out. It was the actual life, the one that had been standing at the arrivals gate of a different possibility the whole time, waiting patiently for me to collect my bags and walk through. Petra in the other room. My brother's visit coming next month. The canal in October light. The library drawings in front of me. Precise and good and worth my full attention. I heard through my brother, eventually and incidentally, that Celeste had left Portland. He didn't know where. He mentioned it the way you mention weather in another city, a thing that happened, noted, complete. I said, "Ah," and went back to my work. This is what winning looks like. Not the raised fist, not the final word delivered to a crumbling adversary, not the dramatic punctuation of a satisfying revenge. Winning looks like a Tuesday morning in a city you earned, with light through the window you chose, and work in front of you that is worth your full attention, and the clean, quiet, ordinary fact of being exactly where you were supposed to be. I was finally, completely, irrevocably free.